Hey folks, George Leoniak here, back with another video here at New Geometry. And this one I'm excited for as well because I'm getting into the 5D shapes, but I want to show in this video how these 5D shape, this pentaract that I'm going to go over, is also connected to a few other three-dimensional forms that we can build from that same model. So I'm going to be talking about this form and describing how I got there through my process. You know, this working with these Zoom tools, creating this shape out of the Zoom tools was kind of my process of discovery. And I think before I jump into the presentation like I normally do with the PowerPoint, I want to just go over a little bit because you'll see some of these slides. This giant structure that I just showed you here was basically constructed out of this at a little bit larger scale. But what I did is you're going to see a cube within these images coming up. This is the blue. And in the previous three videos, I've been really excited about this golden rhombohedron shape that is a kind of flattened cube, I guess you could call it. But remember, this has golden rhombus faces, which means that this length is, let's say, 1 inch, and this would be 0.618 across. Now, here's a regular cube, and from both of these, they both create a hexagon outline, basically. It just depends what they look like from the side view that really tells you from a two-dimensional view that their heights are different three-dimensionally. So there are two versions of this golden rhombohedron. There's this acute version, which is, let's just say, the longer stretched out one, and this obtuse kind of squished version, but they both have the golden rhombic faces. Now, what I did with this golden rhombic face, this rhombohedron shape, is through some of my other videos, if you went back the previous two, starting with the Tree of Life video, that this shape resembles when it's all filled out with the rest of the struts. I discovered that I could build it around the vertices of the cube, dividing this length of the hexagon edge into the golden proportion here. So I did that all the way around and pretty much had it on two of the vertices, the two planes from the top view, two planes that go around, and these two rhombohedron will meet in the center like this. So then I decided, well, I'm just going to build that out and do it off of, well, these vertices and connect the vertices from that view. So it turns out there are 20 of these rhombohedron obtuse versions that will completely encase the cube. Now, when you're building something like that, it's kind of like the thrill of an adventure because there's a lot of crisscrossing of lines. I don't really know what it's going to create when I finally complete all the encircling with these golden rhombic faces all the way around the cube like that. So this is a process of discovery. This is a kind of a stellated version of that. You'll see the pictures in the slideshow, but this is what the full form look like. So this is just your prep to some of the images you're going to see. It's a kind of like this shape here, and I'll give you all the names of what these shapes are in just a little moment. And there's even a cool cultural piece to this. From this shape is part of the Brazilian tradition from Portugal and maybe even throughout the rest of Europe. And they call this shape here the Star of Happiness, or the Giramundo, Giramundos. So anyway, we'll learn a little bit about that as we go too, but it's some neat discoveries coming up here. All right, well, I'm going to jump into the slideshow. Just want to orient you to a little bit of the discoveries of how that form came to be and how it kind of led me on this path. So I'll share the screen, and when I enter into this, I just kind of follow the intuition. I'm not going in looking for forms. I don't really know what might emerge. And this is just a process of discovery and how it relates to a lot of other images and forms that are out there. Now, this is a drawing I did earlier last week. I ended my previous video with this one. And it was inspired by a crop circle, which I'll show you the photo of next. But earlier in the week, I discovered how to draw this with the geometry of it, the sacred geometry of this form. And then discovered the next day, one of my apprentices sent me the photograph of this crop circle that was in 2011 out in a field with this same design. I happened to add these outer circles in after I saw this. But the main design, it turned out to be a 5D hypercube. I didn't even know it was the 5D hypercube. And sometimes I'll come up with these forms and not sure what they're called. So I'll type in, do a Wikipedia search. So I'm thankful for Wikipedia to have such great information on their site. So I found out the outline of that shape was the 5D hypercube because I was able to pull the image off and put it over top of what I had constructed here and overlay it with my sacred geometry drawing and see that all the vertices connected to the same locations within the drawing that I had done. So, I like to just pull these, off here just to show that the underlying template looks like this. And when you're drawing the hypercube, some of these line segments will be left out. But remember, this whole shape that I'm showing you now is this three-dimensional shape, the big red one that I just showed you. This is what this is. That's really what led me there, was this three-dimensional shape and many of the phi-based circle drawings that I've been doing that kind of led me in this direction. So this 5D hypercube is also called pentaract. And the dimensions kind of work like this is a 5D shape. So it's taking the previous form, which would be the 4D tesseract, which is the 4D hypercube. And it's going to take 10 of those tesseracts to create the 5D shape. Just like the tesseract is made out of the 8 cubes, regular cubes, like this type of cube. You put 8 of these cubes together in 4-dimensional space, it will create the tesseract. And then just like this is just one square face. But if you take the previous dimension, the second dimension, which would be the square face, and make it a third dimension, you take 6 of those square faces to make the cube. And that's kind of a simple way to look at how the dimensions progress from the 0 dimension, which is just 1 point. Okay, so that's just a little bit on the dimensions. This is not going to be heavy into the dimensions. It's really more a descriptive analysis of how the Zoom tool construction models that I've been working with, how they kind of led me to these discoveries within the sacred geometry drawing. So I'm literally looking at the Zoom tool models that I'm creating within the drawings that I've been doing and doing a kind of overlay. And remember, this whole thing, and I'll show you in the next slide, really just emerged from wrapping the cube within these golden rhombohedron faces of the obtuse version of the golden rhombohedron. So my previous video, the Sacred Geometry Evolves as Consciousness Evolves, so I think that was something along the title. I went over this, it kind of the culminating form that we went to, and that was the Pentachus icosahedron as the 3D version, which happened to turn out to be the 4D tetraplex. And that underlying vertices of these forms that we're looking at in the 2-dimensional images of the 4D shapes or even the 3D shapes relate to this vertices. Now, this is the inner structure before I stellated this all out with the golden rhombuses. This was before what it looked like, and that would relate to the 4D tetraplex, the Pentachus icosahedron. There's a lot of internal geometry going on inside here, and amazingly, it created the rhombic tricantahedron just the way the lines crisscross internally within the structure. It just formulated that form on the inside of it. And once you stellate these out, it's going to bring us further in. So further out to creating the other structures around it. So here we are. Once again, I'm going back to before the stellated version, just showing you from a couple different views. This is the kind of 5-fold pentagon symmetry of this. I didn't really know what to call this at this point, because all I knew is that, well, there was a icosahedron in it, there was a dodecahedron, the the icosahedron. So there's a lot of shapes. There's cubes in this, there's octahedrons in it, there's tetrahedrons in it. I mean, all the Platonic solids in there, and some of the Archimedean solids. All the vertices are just lining up to create this incredible structure. And really, all I did was just go around the cube with this shape and just circle it and just see what happens, right? 20 of these around it, and just let the geometry kind of guide the process, and then just try to discover what it is that I'm looking at here. So this is again the image that I'm showing you, and the hexagon, the red one, is the rhombohedron obtuse version. There's two of them in this, and they're going along the outer vertices of the two triangles of the cube around the outside, but these vertices don't have any of the rhombohedrons on there yet. So this is the, and when I build this out all the way around, I took out the blue struts that were in there of the starting cube, but this is from the pentagon view, and this is the hexagon view, the six-fold symmetry version of the same form. So, we've got the rhombic tricontahedron underneath, and some, little vertices sticking out beyond it. And then, I'm just connecting the dots to see what they are. And this is kind of what I showed you before. From the top view, they both look like hexagons, when they're isometric, kind of flat 2D drawings. And now this shape, this one of the first shape that I'm showing here, when I do connect all the vertices, it will create the pentachus icosahedron. Now, this is an earlier version where I just put a central ball in and then radiated out all the possible zone ball lengths, and that created the struts of the different colors. That created this pentachus icosahedron, which is essentially got a little point on each of the pentagon faces of the icosahedron. And this was really talked about a lot in my previous video. This is the 4D tetraplex shape of what it would look like, three-dimensionally from this particular perspective. So, that's when we add the blue struts and the yellow struts in here to kind of round this out. Same thing here, connecting the dots all the way around. That will create the structure that we're looking at. But as I was looking at this form throughout my contemplations of the week, I was like, well, it looks to me like it can go further, right? Like I could build off those triangular faces of the icosahedron. I'm able to, stellate those faces. And I noticed that there was a golden rhombus, a cute golden rhombus, the long one, that went down into the form and met at the center point. That actually was the formation of an icosahedron at the center. At the heart of this whole thing was this icosahedron at the center, that these golden rhombuses, these acute ones, were going all the way into the core structure of the shape from the outside. So I had to order more Zoom tools because I ran out. So finally they arrived, and I was able to just do this final stellation, had just enough to kind of create this thing. And then, now I'm looking back at my going back to the drawings, because I want to make everything work from a sacred geometry standpoint and not just have it be an interesting design, that you can only do with a mathematical program of some sort. But we should be able to draw this with just a compass and a ruler and a pencil. So this is from the pentagon view with the phi base circles. These are all the nodal points. It's just given within this design of how to create this, that anybody can do without having to take any measurements or any mathematics. All you have to do is just figure out how to draw this relationship of phi circles, and then just expand them out and then connect the dots, and you come up with the rhombic hexecontahedron. So as of a couple days ago, I'd gone through this whole process and realized I discovered this rhombic hexecontahedron, which is not my first. I'm not the first person discovered, although it's not too long in our history that this became a known form in the mathematic world, at least. I'm forgetting the person's name, a German mathematician in about 1940 did publish this form, but you had great scientists and inventors, astronomers who, like Kepler, they didn't come up with this form. It wasn't until the 1940s, and they were doing stellations of forms of the Da Vinci's, or going way, way back into the times of the flower of life, the Platonic solids, Pythagoras, all that. This form wasn't around that we know of, although it has a folk history with the Brazilian star of happiness that I mentioned before. So we're really kind of curious to see how that showed up there. But this is one of the first sacred geometry drawings that I've seen of it to create this shape. So here's the, and not only from that view, because I like to work with these three orientations of the five-fold, four-fold, and six-fold symmetries, which I call the pentagon, square, and hexagon view. These same five circles that I've been discussing in all my videos, basically what I'm calling the new flower of life, the new seed of life, whatever you want to call it, it's basically a major enhancement to the original flower of life, which I'm saying doesn't even draw regular icosahedron and dodecahedron. There's no way it's going to get us close to drawing these more intricate forms that are built off of the golden rhombus, unless we add the phi-based relationship circles that I'm talking about. So this nested circle within here is based on phi relationship to this outer circle. I could, to get these vertices here, do another layer of circles that are the next version of that, and that will hit those points. But I happen to do these drawings just with this extended circle of the same diameter as the previous one. Here it is in the fourfold symmetry. So this is the same shape, this rhombic hexecontahedron shape. There it is from the pentagon view. There it is from the hexagon type of view. And then the square orientation, let me see if I can line it up. It's going to be the same one as in the drawing, looking like that. So, basically what I do with these forms is I look at them like this and then discover the locations of how they line up within the circle patterns. And magically, these circle patterns of the phi-based circles happen to have all the vertices we need to construct the forms. So it looks a little flat like that. So I tried to be a little more creative with the shading here, just to show that it is a three-dimensional object, even on the 2D. Now remember, this comes from the 5D template that I showed you. And I'm just showing you now that there are three-dimensional forms that are contained within that crop circle image that are the ones that we can actually kind of pick up and play with and feel all happy with the star of happiness within our hand. Which does have a profound effect to add this form in the hand. I do find to be a very a beautiful form to behold and spend time with. So here's that form. And basically this one is constructed out of the 20 acute golden rhombohedron here. So this is the acute one. And all you have to do is make 20 of these little ones and just plug them right into this. And before you have it, this is what you come up with. Now, last night, just last night, after doing all these discoveries, I had no idea that this was the Wolfram Alpha logo. And Wolfram is like the big mathematician. They developed this software called Mathematica, which I don't know how to use, never used it, but I do visit their site a lot because they have such excellent drawings. So whenever I'm trying to discover what form I've created here, I do a search on Wikipedia, and Wolfram also comes up in those searches. But they decided to use this as their logo because Stephen Wolfram here, just in his observations with working with the program, discovered this form because he thought it had such amazing, unique properties, and was really excited about. They call it spiky, and there's this great article I would highly recommend. Typing this URL into your browser and reading this article from the head to toe, because it really gives you a kind of evolution of the sacred I'm calling the sacred geometry, but really the history of geometry, from way back in time, and how this form really eluded the early philosophers or contemplators of geometry up until the 1940s, and then was taken further by other researchers, which I'll describe in a second. But when I first built this form, I was like, well, the rhombic tricontahedron should be able to just plug right into these faces. And I tried in one of my earlier videos to show what it would look like if I just went around and plugged in 12 of those in a flat 2D drawing. But they had this awesome software with the Wolfram Math program that integrates the tricontahedron. And basically you can kind of build out into space, continuing to plug in the tricontahedron in this shape, 12 around 1. This would be the one in the middle. But really what that comes down to is, remember I did this one on quasi-crystals. I took this apart to show you that this is all just built up out of little obtuse and acute golden rhombohedron. You could take this apart and it's just integrating more with more golden rhombuses. So really, the two root shapes that we're dealing with within this is really just these two, and the Belinsky dodecahedron, when you connect these two together, just can go infinitely, I believe, out into space of just those basic root elementary shapes. So there was one neat discovery in reading the article that I kind of knew intuitively, but never really described it this way. So it was nice to read the article and then go back to my drawings and just highlight it in that. So within that rhombic hexecontahedron, they break the vertices into the innermost vertices, which are tucked in at the central point here. So that's the innermost. You've got a mid vertice, which is down at this bottom little V shape here. And then you've got the outer vertice here. So the outer one I knew was the dodecahedron, and then the inner one, so the outer one creates a dodecahedron. So in my drawing, this is the sacred geometry drawing, we could create the dodecahedron. Now remember, these are accurate dodecahedrons. I've done all the measurements up a gazillion times now to double check this in comparison to the regular flower of life. But when you're working with the phi-based circles, what you're going to do is you're going to get this correct length to back edge, which if this is 1, that will be 0.618 along the back edge. And that's what the original flower of life didn't do. So within this, I'm able to nest the dodecahedron. I'm not highlighting the rhombic hexecontahedron. It's basically where these dotted lines are within this. And then I could go into the midpoints, which are down in the little V points. And that creates the 30 vertices of the Icasi dodecahedron, which you could see here in the red. And then the innermost vertice is the icosahedron, which has the 12 vertices. And we have the 3 versions of that straight from this simple drawing. We just have to identify the locations. And I don't know if there's an earlier video I did on the golden hexagon, and it's showing up all of a sudden in these drawings. So this is the golden hexagon. That edge, that dotted line would be 1. This would be 0.618, 1, 0.618, all the way around. That's the golden hexagon with the smaller triangle in the middle. It's going to be throughout all the geometry of these patterns. So that golden hexagon was kind of like a premonition of things to come, of how it's going to integrate into these new flower of life designs. And it really upgrades our ability to draw these more complex spiky forms that we didn't really have a way of doing. I mean, I'd been to the Wolfram Alpha site before, and I didn't even pay attention to their logo, I'll admit, because it was just like a spiky form that I didn't know how to draw in sacred geometry. So it was like, I guess it didn't mean much because everything's supposed to be in the flower of life. But I guess, the traditional flower of life, but it wasn't part of my consciousness. This wasn't part of my consciousness because I didn't have any relationship to it with the flower of life. Everything was just the isotropic vector matrix and just the cube octahedron. And that was pretty much all that was doing, was cube octahedrons and tetrahedrons. I didn't know how to integrate phi. So with these circle patterns that I've been doing with the phi circles from those 3 views, remember, this is a totally unified sacred geometry that I'm showing you, because this is the same phi circles in all 3 drawings, and it does the vector matrix, isotropic vector matrix and all that. It's not like we're throwing that out. It's just like we're adding this in addition to that, that gets us our sacred geometry into a point where it's able to keep up with the mathematicians and the scientists and the quasi-crystals, and which are really recent discoveries since 1980. Remember, this flower of life pattern goes way back in time, which is still the root fundamental pattern for the hexagon view, but now we've included more on the pentagon view and the square view. And at that time, it's thought that Pythagoras or Plato, whoever kind of coined the Platonic solids, their biggest thing they focused on back then was pyrite, because it had a cube. It was a crystalline structure, it was cubic, and it didn't really produce perfect dodecahedrons, although you can create a dodecahedron. But the quasi-crystals, like in my quasi-crystal video, really opened up the can of worms to rewrite the books of crystallography to include these quasi-crystal and these phi-based structures, which these types of shapes are related to. So sacred geometry, has to keep up with the times. It has to evolve with these new structures and new forms. And what I've found is that these phi-based circles that I've been showing in these drawings are what does it to connect the new versions, these newer forms that are really just within this previous century and going into this current century have really come to light. So it's pretty neat to see how this is kind of coming about and going backwards to upgrade the sacred geometry. So anyway, this is earlier in the week, I discovered this connection between this HSM Coexter. He's considered a person who kind of like saved geometry, because he brought the geometry into the fourth and fifth dimension with a lot of his work. And, I didn't realize after creating this shape, but I happened to come across his book and look at the front cover, and I was like, hey, that looks familiar to something I saw on this book, so I'm going to check it out. And it happened to be the same drawing. Now remember, this is the same drawing that you're seeing here that's on the cover of this book. It's way back here on this crop circle here, right? This is the 5D pentaract. And, with my apprentices this past week, I showed them how to draw this pentaract. And it's, your lines are definitely not perfect. So it's amazing how this was created to get this level of precision at this scale, when it's very difficult to do, even in a notebook with the straight edge pencil and compass, to get that level of precision. I mean, I can do it on the iPad, but to get this level of precision at this scale is pretty impressive. But he's showing us here in his book that these two forms, and this was over my head at the time, are actually the same thing. So this is a 3D version. Now this is a slightly different than the rhombic, than this one, the rhombic hexecontahedron. It's slightly different than that Wolfram logo, because what it does have is it's got the tricontahedron shape kind of poking through. These vertices are kind of poking through, creating this other shape. And that's actually what this form, the big red one, big red here, is actually showing, that with these extended blue vertices that you see in the drawing there. It actually has that integrated into this. So this is actually more representation of what I'm showing you now than it was with this, the rhombic hexecontahedron. So this is actually more giving you the full complete picture of all the vertices connected, similar to that. And this is the great rhombic tricontahedron. And here is Coexter showing us that this is essentially that. And this is the 3D representation, or one possible 3D representation of this 5D pentaract hypercube. So that was pretty cool to see the relationship and connection there. And once again, I didn't show the version from the fourfold symmetry, but I'm able to draw that from the hexagon view, once again, using all these phi-based circles to get the appropriate places of where the lines line up on that. So I feel like that's a pretty, successful expansion in sacred geometry with these phi-based circles, really bringing these kind of spiky forms that were well outside my consciousness right down onto the drawing pad that anybody can do. You don't need to have the Wolfram Math software program, although I'm definitely thinking of learning it because I'd love to be able to draw some of those other incredible images that they're constructing there. But you could do this right at home and cut it out and make it yourself as well. And that's what people in Brazil that maybe came from Portugal or someplace in Europe have been doing for a long time. It's considered that maybe these go maybe 300, 400, 500 years old, maybe further in history, that they were making these stars of happiness, they were called the Giramundo, or the world Turner as another name, or world circuit, depending on how you translate these names. And there's an artisan from Brazil who was taught this tradition from her grandmother, who learned it from her grandmother, and they've been stitching these together. And it's thought that what they like to do is it's passed on from mother to daughter. Occasionally there's some money stuffed in the middle of these, and all these are some patchwork from clothing that the baby wore and through growing up, just to remind a child of all the connection to their culture, their history, their heritage, to their early life. So it's like a carriance of a memory of the early times in life, and bundle of star of happiness and connection. So I thought that was really kind of a nice connection, because with my group on Monday, the apprentice group, I was like, geez, I don't really know what to call this form. Although when I was showing to everyone, they were really having, people were definitely having a kind of opening to it, some feelings of happiness and joy were coming up and looking at it. So it was really neat to make the connection that this is connected to a tradition. So it has a name, Star of Happiness, the Giramundo World Turner already. So, it's neat to see that the evolution of the sacred geometry, just 2 more slides, and then I'll kind of hop off of the presentation. But these phi-based circles, like I've been mentioning, will also open up to the great icosahedron, which is a form that Kepler discovered, and these other forms like the excavated dodecahedron or the great dodecahedron, great icosahedron. I'm sure that these are all in this too. So it's really giving a plethora of new sacred geometry, not new, but new to the sacred geometry drawing techniques with compass and straight edge, how to integrate these into our pattern language. And this is just a quick coloring in of that, complex great icosahedron image. So yes, definitely the Star of Happiness is where it's at. I appreciate you joining me for that adventure. And just to go over the models one more time so you can see it once again. So here's Big Red, all made out of the same struts. Here it is from the kind of pentagon view. Here it is from the hexagon view. So it's got the golden rhombus that goes in the middle. And it's kind of like after a while, this can continue to expand out. I added on more to fill in the dodecahedron and connecting all with the just red struts. And it's just going to make larger and larger holographic representations of itself. And I really think, because this structure can just be continually made out of just these flattened rhombohedrons, golden rhombohedron, and the acute one. So it's kind of like a new way to kind of start the process of like the vector equilibrium kind of starts off with a root form and then kind of builds off with the similar size struts in every direction. Well, this is a similar version, but it's doing it all with phi-based struts, because those red struts go right into the middle, and the hull that it makes with those red struts is the icosahedron. It's kind of like the icosahedron is the underlying form that kind of these other ones blossom out of. And it's not like the cube isn't integrated into this. It's right here within the structure. And just to reiterate from the beginning, my process of how this came about was just going around all these vertices of the cube with 20 of these rhombohedron, connecting them together in all different possible directions that were available. And then that created this giant structure that we're looking at here, which can continue to go on. So it's totally an expansive form that goes inward and outer in that holographic fractal way, but it fully integrates of 5 proportions and relationships, and includes all the Platonic solids within it. So the sacred geometry drawings now are completely nested Platonic solids. So all that's been cleaned up, and we're getting the accurate drawings plus these new sacred geometry drawings that we can integrate into our pattern language. So anybody can do, like you and I can do this with just the compass and straight edge. So I'm really grateful to have gone on the journey of discovery, to kind of reach into the language of light there, pull these out so we can put them right down on our drawing pad at home. So much love and appreciation. Until next time, have a great week, and I'll see you then.